Chapter 21, Human Prints. A breakdown description of a bare footprint will enable a tracker to describe fully what he has seen without omitting any detail. He will be able to extract from the print the maximum amount of information. We then move on logically to a full description of how a tracker studies a print made by a quarry wearing footwear. The next stage is to analyze the walking action to see how a track, that is, a series of prints, is produced. The chapter concludes with what can be deduced from these detailed observations by noting what causes peculiarities in a print or a track. Bare footprints. To find some reference point, the footprint is divided in Figure 59. There is a fixed axis and a line at right angles to this. The axis of the foot is a line that passes through the heel to the center of the big toe. From this axis, the other reference line is that which just touches the lowest edge of the little toe. As a further help, a third line has been drawn from the tip of the big toe to the tip of the little toe. The analysis follows the scheme below. The toes. Count them. There are not always 5. The pad under the toe. This is the only part of the toe that normally comes into contact with the ground when walking. The length of the toes, long or short. The relative length of the toes, in some cases the second toe is longer than the big toe. The position of the toes with reference to the diagonal line, in some cases the third toe is furthest from the diagonal line, in other cases the fourth. Spacing. In some cases, there is a space between the second and third toes. In others, there is a large space between the third and fourth. The configuration of the forward edge of the impression of the sole and the toe prints. The shape of the outer edges of the print. The form of the instep, pronounced or weak. The size and shape of the heel. The size and shape of the ball of the foot. The pattern of the area connecting the heel and ball pads. Any peculiarities, creases, cracks, and scars. When we consider these features of the human footprint and the differences that can exist, it is easy to comprehend the possibility of a trained tracker being able to tell one person from another by footprints. The tracker, confronted with a foot and a footprint made by the foot, has to realize that they will not necessarily be one and the same in form because of weight distribution, gait of the quarry, and ground irregularities. Also, if the quarry is attempting to confuse a tracker, he may change his gait, which can alter the appearance of his footprints. For instance, a shuffle or placing the foot at a different angle, or a slight twist as the foot meets the ground will make the difference to the impression made. Footwear prints. The footwear print is a result of the footwear itself, that is, how it left the factory or the cobbler's last, how it has been worn since then, duration of wear and characteristics of the wearer, and how it was placed on the tracking medium by the quarry. In setting out to study a footwear mark, the following points should be noted. Length of the footwear mark from heel to toe, breadth of sole at its broadest point, length of the heel from the front edge behind the instep to the back of the heel, breadth of the heel, height of the heel, if on soft soil, number, shape, and position of nails, if any distinctive marks made by the sole or heel, any logos or writing, wear marks, the shape of the various parts of the print, the toe, heel, and sole, any indication as to the composition of the footwear, rubber, leather, rope, canvas, or plastic. If there is a succession of footmarks, length of stride from the toe of one footmark to the back of the heel of the next successive footmark. Any indications of sex or age from such features as size or footwear style. When trying to match a print to a particular piece of footwear, be careful not to make the obvious mistake of fitting the specimen footwear over the original sign, fouling or obliterating it. As with all important pieces of sign, it is well worth recording details by sketching or photographing them. Always leave a scale marker alongside the print for future reference. Prints and the walking action. To gain full insight into what we are looking at when we study a human footprint, it is necessary to have an understanding of the walking action. A slow motion picture shows you the movements made in walking. This type of demonstration is useful to illustrate the walking action and how it influences the sign. The muscular motions that propel a man forward have their counterpart in the track he leaves on the ground. The following is a description of the walking action. See Figure 60. From the standing position, a man leans forward. This throws his center of gravity in the direction in which he intends to go. As he does this, he commences to bend the knee of the leg he intends to move forward first. We will assume that he intends to step off with the left leg. He bends the left knee, and at practically the same time, in order to relieve the ankle, he raises the left heel from the ground. As the leg moves forward, the whole of the sole of the foot leaves the ground, the toe being the last to lose contact. At the same time, he leans slightly over to the right, throwing his weight gradually onto the right leg and foot until they bear the full weight of his body. The right foot is flat on the ground, and the weight of the body distributed equally along the length of the sole from heel to toe until it bears a full weight of his body. The left leg is advanced, and simultaneously, the center of gravity is thrown further forward. When there is a danger of the balance being lost, the left leg straightens out, and the left heel touches the ground. In the meantime, the right leg is bent at the knee, and the right heel is forced to leave the ground. With the result of that, the weight of the body is borne on the back of the left heel and the front of the right toe, the center of gravity of the body being swung forward and to the left by the push of the right toe. The direction of this force causes the man to strike the ground with the other side of the back of the heel, which goes downward and forward into the ground, pushing the soil, if soft, in front of it. This soil is gradually forced down and forward as the left foot comes to the ground from heel to toe. Before the right toe leaves the ground, it gives a final push forward towards the left foot, which has the effect of pushing the soil away in a contrary direction. All the weight is then borne on the left foot, and the right foot swings forward, causing the center of gravity again to change directions towards the right. The effect of this change of direction is to cause the left foot to exert pressure similarly. When the heel touches the ground, it pushed the soil forward and slightly outwards. Then it pressed it straight down as the pressure passed directly over it, and now it presses it to the rear and outwards as the left heel begins to lift for its second step. This roll of the foot is what makes the impression of the foot broader than the foot itself actually is. Studying this movement tells us where to look for the most marked impressions of the foot on the ground. The two most marked are those made by the outer side of the back of the heel and the inner side of the toe. The next two are those made by the ball of the foot behind the big toe and by the outer side of the foot behind the little toe. Then there is a small heap of soil thrown forward by the back of the heel and pressed down by the flat of the heel, and finally a certain amount of soil thrown back by the toe and not pressed down. Two important points arise. On hard ground, there may be no other mark left on the ground except where the heel first struck the ground and where the toe last left it. The faster a person walks, the more soil will be dispatched by the toe, and that soil will be loose. In the ordinary walk, the heel meets the ground first and the toes point slightly outward, following the direction of the thrust made by the opposite foot. I have emphasized ordinary because if the person is thinking about how he walks, he can alter his profile. We now have the ordinary marks left by an average man at an ordinary walk. The relationship of the left foot mark to the right will vary according to the man. The distance between each foot mark will be slightly over 30 inches. If a string were stretched along the center of the line of walk, it would pass over both heels, but the left toes would fall to the left of it and the right toes to the right. Speed. If the walk is slower, more balance will be required. On one's feet, as on a bicycle, the heels will lie more off the center line to the left and right respectively. The slower the walk, the more there will be a tendency to place the feet wider apart, and the toes at a greater angle. Figure 61-1. When a man trots, figure 61-2, he merely speeds up his walk, and the track he leaves is speeded up accordingly. The same characteristics in regard to the parts of the print most marked in the soil pressed forward or back will be present, but to a marked degree. The distance between each step will be lengthened, and since he has more balance because he is going faster, there will be a tendency for the marks to be in a straighter line. It is to be noticed that the impression of the toes will be deeper and that of the heels correspondingly lighter, but in soft soil the marks of the heels will be easily apparent. Gradient. In walking up a slope, the heel strikes less and less depending on the hill gets steeper because when the foot is brought to the ground, the leg is bent at the knee. There is also a tendency to walk with the toes pointing straighter forward. In walking down a slope at an ordinary pace, the feet are kept practically straight, but more flat to the ground so that the toe and the back of the heel strike less deeply than when walking on the level. In hurrying down a slope, however, the heels are struck sharply into the ground to act as brakes and the paces are considerably longer. Training or panic flight. A significant difference can be seen in the track of a man trained to run fast versus that of an untrained runner. A trained runner sprinting will bring the ball of his foot only to the ground and thrust off with his toes. He leaves no marks with his heels. His paces are much longer than that at a trot, and the marks left by his toes are in a straight line with very marked backwards-facing pushing marks, figure 61-3. An untrained man running fast will probably show a different kind of track altogether. It is quite possible that he will bring his heel down to the ground first, in the same way as in the walking only with increased force. His feet tend to point out again, as in walking, and the line of his track will not be so straight. The untrained man running fast is manifesting a phenomenon known as panic flight, to which even a trained runner is prone in times of danger. I have personal experience of panic flight. One summer's day, as a young boy, I was accompanying my father on a fishing expedition. On our way to the river, we had to cross a few meadows. We were climbing out of a dip and coming over a low crest when we were surprised by a bull. He'd just managed to exit the field ahead of the snorting animal. The walk, the trot, and the sprint are the human animal's three main gaits, but for the purposes of clarification, a human tracks, I suppose, to add four more. Those made by a man walking backwards, those made by a man carrying a load, those made by a man who is exhausted, those made by men suffering from some physical infirmity. Walking backwards. The movements and the sign left by a man walking ordinarily have been fully described. It stands to reason that if he is going to reverse the direction of these movements, the effects of them on the ground will also be reversed. This is, of course, precisely what happens. Thus, instead of pushing off from his toe at each step, he pushes off from his heel. Instead of his heel first striking the ground at the completion of each step, his toe does. The marks he makes on the ground then shows a pushback from the heel. There is no pushback from the toe. The steps are shorter. The line of walk is uncertain. The toes may turn in. There may be a shuffle of the soil in a backward direction from toe to heel. Carrying a load. If a man is carrying a burden, he has to propel himself forward, and in addition, he has to force the extra weight forward. See figure 61-4. These characteristics show in the track. The steps are shorter, the feet are planted wider apart laterally, the line of march is uncertain as the extra weight affects the balance, the indentations are deeper than they would ordinarily be, especially at the toe. There is the obvious dilemma as to whether the quarry is heavy or whether the quarry is light and carrying a pack. The uncertainty of the line is the strongest clue to differentiate. There may be corroborating evidence, such as pack marks at resting places or against trees. Exhausted. If a man is exhausted, he loses some control over his legs. Anyone who has run a grueling race realizes this fact to the full. Those who haven't probably have seen such a race and notice how runners stagger off the track. This isn't histrionics for the camera. The track gives a true picture of the extent of the exhaustion. The marks left on the ground show that the feet have strayed from a well-central balance. The feet are inclined to cross over each other. The line of advance is very uncertain. The outer edges of each impression are deeply indented. There is no cleanness or definite pattern in the track as a whole. It shambles about. A similar track would be left by either a wounded man, where there may be other evidence such as blood stains or medical discardables, or a drunken man, in which case there may be discardables such as bottles, or there may be vomit or many urination sites. Other deductions from prints. This material should be cross-referenced with Chapter 15 to give a full description of the intelligence to be gleaned from prints by the trained tracker. It cannot be overemphasized how important it is for the tracker to sketch the first good print he finds of his quarry. The sketch will be an invaluable record later on in the pursuit to which he will be able to refer. The following gives a detailed analysis. An estimate of height can be deduced from the length of the stride and from the length of the footmark. Weight can be deduced from the depth of the impression. It has already been noted that this can be affected by the load the quarry is carrying. The combination of the height and weight will give an indication as to build, but further characteristics are seen in the case of obese persons who are inclined to plant their feet further apart to afford them balance, and also inclined to turn their toes inward, or I should say turn their toes outwards. The socioeconomic group by the type and upkeep of the footwear. Physical condition of the quarry. This has a considerable effect on a track. Knock-kneedness shows up with the heels apart. The right heel falls a little to the right and the left heel a little to the left of the central line of the track. The inner side of the back of his heel, and not the outer side, will strike the ground first and leave a correspondingly marked impression. A wound, injury, or malformation of the leg will frequently entail a difference in the length of stride. Lameness is indicated by 2 footmarks close together, followed by a space and another 2 prints. Usually the short pace is made by the sound leg, as this is bearing the weight a disproportionate amount of the time, thus allowing the lame leg to be thrown forward further. A damaged heel's impression will be light, as will a sore toe. If the leg is stiff, the steps may be of equal length, but there may be signs of the foot brushing into place on the ground, usually from an outward and backward direction. A blind person leaves a short pace. The line of march is apt to be uncertain. The feet are planted wider apart. There may be marks of a stick or a dog. Age influences the walk to a considerable degree, in that older people are apt to become infirm, their powers of balance are lessened, entailing spread-out feet, line of march not as straight, shorter steps, and sometimes a shuffling action. Summary. The analysis of a human footprint shows this scheme. Count the toes. Study the pad under the toe. Length of the toes. Relative length of the toes. Position of the toes with reference to that diagonal line. Spacing of the toes. The configuration of the forward edge of the impression of the sole and the toe prints. Shape of the outer edges of the print. Form of the instep, pronounced or weak. Size and shape of the heel. Size and shape of the ball of the foot. The pattern of the area connecting the heel and ball pads. Any peculiarities, creases, cracks, and scars. The analysis of a footwear mark. Length of mark, breadth, length of the heel, breadth of the heel, height of the heel, number, shape, and position of nails, any distinctive marks, any logos or writing, wear marks, the shape of the various parts of the print, any indication as to the composition of the footwear. If there is a succession of footmarks, length of stride from the toe of one footmark to the back of the heel of the next successive footmark. Indications of sex or age. Factors affecting the print: speed, gradient, level of fitness, level of tiredness, load carrying, deception tactics.